Summer 1935, 11:42 p.m. Alhambra, Bar, and Theater, 126th Street and 7th Avenue. Bumpy Johnson was having dinner with a white woman when the man he'd stabbed 36 times walked through the door. Ulysses Rollins, Chicago enforcer, Dutch Schultz's best killer. The same man whose blood Bumpy had mopped off a Harlem sidewalk 4 weeks ago. The same man who'd sworn on his hospital bed that Bumpy Johnson was a dead man walking. Bumpy was sitting across from Helen Lawrenson, senior editor at Vanity Fair magazine. Impeccable gray suit, fedora on the table, fork in one hand, cutting into his steak. He didn't flinch when Rollins walked in, didn't reach for the switchblade in his jacket, just kept chewing. Helen saw Rollins first, saw the way his hand moved toward his waistband, saw murder in his eyes. "Bumpy." "I see him." Bumpy set down his fork, wiped his mouth with the napkin, stood up slowly. "Excuse me for a moment, Helen. I need to handle something." He walked across that crowded restaurant like he was going to shake hands with an old friend. 20 feet, then 10. Rollins' hand was inside his jacket now, reaching for his gun. Bumpy pulled his knife first. What happened next took 7 seconds. 7 seconds that 200 people would talk about for the rest of their lives. 7 seconds of sounds that made hardened gangsters look away. When Bumpy straightened his tie and walked back to his table, Ulysses Rollins was on the floor, face destroyed, body gashed open, and one eyeball hanging from the socket by thin red ligaments. Bumpy sat down, picked up the menu, looked at Helen like nothing had happened. "You know what? I suddenly got a taste for spaghetti and meatballs." This wasn't the first time Bumpy Johnson had sent a message written in blood, and before this war was over, 40 more men would learn what Rollins learned that night. You don't come to Harlem unless Harlem invites you. To understand how Bumpy Johnson became the man who could casually order spaghetti while stepping over a body with its eyeball hanging out, you need to go back 3 years. Sing Sing prison. Bumpy Johnson walked out the gates with .347 in his pocket and a bump on the back of his head that had gotten him beaten his whole life. 26 years old, short, thick South Carolina accent. 3 years in solitary confinement because he couldn't stop fighting guards who called him boy. Prison taught him something the streets never could. Violence done calmly is 10 times more terrifying than violence done angry. The men who screamed before they swung, you could see them coming. The men who smiled while they stabbed you, those were the ones who ran the yard. Bumpy was broke. No connections, no crew, no future, just a nickname from a deformity and a reputation for not backing down. Harlem in 1932 wasn't the Harlem Renaissance anymore. The Depression had crushed it. 50% unemployment, families getting evicted daily, soup lines stretching around blocks. The music was still playing in the clubs, but behind closed doors, people were starving. But there was one business keeping Harlem alive: the numbers racket. 30 black-owned policy banks, turning over tens of millions annually. Poor folks betting nickels and dimes on 3-digit combinations. 500 to 1 payoffs. Half of Harlem's 175,000 residents played daily. It wasn't just gambling, it was hope. It was employment. It was one of the only black-owned businesses in America that made real money. And the woman who ran the biggest operation was Stephanie St. Clair, French Caribbean, immigrant. 5'2", of pure fire. $200,000 annual income when most black families made $500 a year. She'd built her empire from nothing, paid her people well, took care of the neighborhood. They called her Madam Queen, but she had a problem walking through her door in the summer of 1932. His name was Dutch Schultz. Here's what you need to understand about Harlem. Every doorman saw everything. Every shoeshine boy heard everything. Every cab driver knew everything. The neighborhood had eyes everywhere. You couldn't move through Harlem without Harlem knowing about it. That network was about to become a weapon. Dutch Schultz was born Arthur Flegenheimer in the Bronx, German Jewish, bootlegger, and the most brutal gangster in New York. Not the most powerful. That was Lucky Luciano. Not the richest. That was Frank Costello. But the most brutal? That crown belonged to Dutch Schultz, and he wore it proud. When Prohibition started dying in the early 30s, Schultz needed a new income stream. He looked at Harlem and saw millions in the numbers racket. Black folks betting, black folks collecting, black folks getting rich. He decided that needed to change. November 1931, Black Wednesday, the number 527 hit heavy. Thousands of people had bet on it. The payout should have been massive. Instead, it bankrupted half of Harlem's black bankers. They couldn't cover the wins. Dutch Schultz appeared the next day with loans. Generous loans. All you had to do was sign your business over to him. One by one, they fell. Desperate men signing away their operations just to stay afloat. Within 6 months, Dutch Schultz controlled most of Harlem's numbers operation. The signs changed. The collectors changed. And the money flowed out of Harlem into the Bronx. But Schultz didn't just want the money. He wanted submission. His reputation preceded him. When a competitor named Joe Rock refused to pay protection money, Schultz had him kidnapped, hung by his thumbs on meat hooks in a warehouse, took gauze bandages, soaked them in discharge from a gonorrhea patient, wrapped them around Rock's eyes until the infection made him go blind. Then he forced Rock into partnership. That's who Dutch Schultz was, a man who would literally blind you and then make you work for him. When he took his operations into Harlem, he brought that energy with him. His collectors beat people in broad daylight. His enforcers threatened shopkeepers. And when anyone complained, Schultz had a simple response. These niggers need a white man to run things properly. He said it to his crew. He said it to the police he paid off. He said it to the politicians in his pocket. And he believed it. Stephanie St. Clair was one of the few who refused to fold. Her operation was too big, too established, too protected by the community. When Schultz sent collectors to her door, she had them thrown down the stairs. When he sent threats, she published newspaper ads. Buy black, only patronize black numbers bankers. Schultz's response was simple: send men. Kill her. Kill everyone working for her. Show Harlem what happens when they don't bow. That's when Madam Queen made a decision. She needed muscle, real muscle. Someone who didn't care about the odds. Someone who understood that violence wasn't business. It was personal. She hired the broke ex-con with the bumpy head and the dead eyes. When Dutch Schultz heard that Stephanie St. Clair had hired Bumpy Johnson, he laughed. Send 9 of my best men to Harlem. I want this handled by the end of the week. 9 white enforcers, armed, experienced. Killers who'd survived the beer wars and gang conflicts in the Bronx. They walked into Harlem like they owned it. Big mistake. Bumpy Johnson assembled his crew within 48 hours. 9 men total. Street fighters, ex-cons, men who'd been beaten by the system their whole lives and had nothing left to lose. They met in the back room of a speakeasy on 193rd Street. Bumpy stood at the head of the table with a map of Harlem spread out in front of him. Here's what nobody's figured out yet, Bumpy said, tapping the map. They stand out. We don't. Every white face in Harlem gets noticed. Every doorman sees them. Every cab driver knows where they're going. Every shoeshine boy watches them walk by. He looked around the table. We use that. We move like ghosts. They move like targets. The first hit happened 3 days later. Mount Morris Park, 2:17 a.m. One of Schultz's collectors, a man named Tommy Graziano, was found face down near the park entrance. 3 bullets in the back of his head. No witnesses, no sounds, just a body and a message. The second hit was bolder. 125th Street, 1:30 p.m., broad daylight. Another one of Schultz's enforcers. Mickey Sullivan, walked into an alley to take a leak. Never walked out. Someone found him 20 minutes later, stabbed 7 times, bled out in the trash. The killer had vanished into the crowd. Dozens of people on that street. Nobody saw anything. Bodies started appearing faster. Mount Morris Park became the dumping ground. White bodies in a black neighborhood. The police barely investigated. Schultz's men weren't supposed to be in Harlem anyway, and the cops he didn't pay off weren't interested in solving murders of white mobsters terrorizing black neighborhoods. Within 2 months, 6 of Schultz's original 9 enforcers were dead. He sent more. They died too. Meanwhile, Stephanie St. Clair waged her own war. She walked into Schultz's betting parlors in broad daylight and smashed the plate glass cases with a crowbar. Single-handedly destroyed thousands in property. When his men tried to stop her, she pulled a pistol and dared them to move. She tipped off the police about Schultz's locations. Raids followed. One raid on West 116th Street seized $12 million in cash and policy slips. 14 of Schultz's men arrested. The newspaper ads kept running. Buy black, support your community. Dutch Schultz is stealing from Harlem. Schultz was hemorrhaging money, hemorrhaging men. And for the first time in his criminal career, he was losing. That's when he made the call to Chicago, Ulysses Rollins. They called him the Chicago Cleaner, a specialist, the kind of man you sent when everyone else failed. Cold-blooded, professional, kill count in the double digits. His instructions were simple. Find Bumpy Johnson, kill him, end this war. Rollins arrived in Harlem on a Tuesday. By Friday, he'd located Bumpy's patterns, the speakeasies he visited, the restaurants he ate at, the streets he walked. Bumpy carried a switchblade everywhere, Italian-made, razor-sharp, 7-inch blade that he could deploy in half a second. What nobody told Rollins was that Bumpy Johnson didn't just carry the knife. He was an artist with it. Spring 1935, 103rd Street. They called it Jungle Alley, a strip of speakeasies, jazz clubs, and after-hours joints where white folks came uptown to feel dangerous. Bumpy was walking out of the Ya Man Club at 11:30 p.m. when he saw Ulysses Rollins standing across the street. 20 feet separated them. Both men froze. Rollins had been hunting Bumpy for 2 weeks, following him, learning his patterns, waiting for the right moment. This was the moment. Rollins' hand moved toward his jacket. Bumpy saw the movement, saw the intent, and instead of running, instead of drawing his own weapon, he smiled. Then he started walking. Not away. Toward. Rollins pulled his gun. A Colt M1911. Raised it. Aimed. Bumpy was already closing the distance. 10 feet, then 5. Rollins fired. Missed. Bumpy's knife was out. The blade caught the streetlight for half a second before it disappeared into Rollins' stomach. Then it came out. Went back in. Again. Again, the speed was inhuman. The precision surgical. Every strike hitting vital areas. Stomach, ribs, throat, face. Rollins dropped his gun. Tried to fight back. Couldn't. The knife kept moving. People started screaming, running. The jazz music stopped. When Bumpy finally stepped back, Ulysses Rollins collapsed onto the sidewalk. Blood pooling beneath him, his shirt shredded, his face unrecognizable. Someone would count later. 36 stab wounds. Bumpy wiped the blade on Rollins' jacket, folded the knife, put it back in his pocket. Then he walked away. Not running, not hurrying, just walking, like he'd just finished a conversation. He turned the corner onto Lenox Avenue and disappeared into the night. Rollins was found 20 minutes later, still alive, barely, rushed to Harlem Hospital. The doctors worked on him for 6 hours, counted 36 separate wounds. Any 5 of them should have been fatal, but Rollins survived. In his hospital bed, barely able to speak, through the bandages covering his face, he made a promise to the men from Schultz's crew who visited him. Next time I see Bumpy Johnson, he's a dead man. I don't care if I die doing it. He's dead. What Rollins didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson ate at the same restaurant every Thursday night. Frank's on 125th Street. Same table, same time, and Bumpy wasn't hiding. Summer 1935. Alhambra Bar and Theater. 11:42 p.m. Bumpy Johnson was supposed to be lying low. Dutch Schultz had 15 men actively hunting him. The police had orders to bring him in on sight. Every white mobster in New York wanted him dead. Instead, he was having dinner with Helen Lawrenson, white woman, senior editor at Vanity Fair magazine. She'd been interviewing him for weeks, fascinated by Harlem's underworld, wanted to write a profile on the man everyone said couldn't be killed. They were halfway through the main course when Ulysses Rollins walked through the door. 3 months had passed since Bumpy put 36 holes in him on 103rd Street. 3 months of surgery, physical therapy, learning to walk again, learning to hold a gun with hands that barely worked. But Rollins could still pull a trigger. Helen saw him first, saw the scars covering his face, the way he moved like every step hurt, the murder in his eyes when he spotted Bumpy. Bumpy, that man, I know. Bumpy set down his fork, wiped his mouth. Excuse me for a moment, Helen. This won't take long. He stood up, adjusted his jacket, started walking across the restaurant. The room went quiet. 200 people watching. Everyone knew who Bumpy Johnson was. Everyone recognized the scars on Rollins' face. They knew what was about to happen. Bumpy crossed the floor like he was walking to greet an old friend. Calm, unhurried. His right hand slipped inside his jacket. Rollins reached for his gun. His damaged hands fumbled with the grip. Too slow. Always too slow. Bumpy's switchblade came out. What happened next wasn't a fight. It was a lesson. The first strike hit Rollins' gun hand. The pistol clattered to the floor. The second strike opened his cheek from ear to jaw. The third, fourth, fifth came so fast they blurred together. Rollins tried to cover his face, tried to fight back, couldn't. The sounds filled that restaurant, steel cutting through flesh, through cartilage, through bone, the wet thud of a body hitting the floor, the gasps from the crowd, tables emptied, people backed against the walls. The band stopped playing mid-note. When Bumpy finally stepped back, Ulysses Rollins was on the ground, face destroyed, blood spreading across the hardwood floor, and his left eyeball hanging from the socket by thin red ligaments. Bumpy stood over him for a moment, studied his work. Then he carefully wiped the blade on Rollins' jacket, folded the knife, and put it back in his pocket. He adjusted his tie, straightened his jacket, stepped over Rollins like he was stepping over a puddle, walked back to his table, sat down across from Helen Lawrenson, who hadn't moved, hadn't breathed, hadn't blinked. Bumpy picked up the menu, studied it, looked up at her, and smiled. You know what, Helen? I suddenly got a taste for spaghetti and meatballs. Helen would write about that moment for the next 40 years. The way Bumpy's voice never changed. The way he ordered food while a man lay dying 6 feet away. The way the entire restaurant stayed frozen until the ambulance arrived. Rollins was carried out on a stretcher, still breathing, somehow. The doctors at Harlem Hospital saved his life. Again, reattached what they could, told him he was lucky to be alive. 2 weeks later, Rollins proved he wasn't interested in luck. Frank's Restaurant, 125th Street, Thursday night, 8:47 p.m. Bumpy was at his usual table, back to the wall, clear view of the entrance, eating alone. The door opened. Ulysses Rollins stood there, bandages still covering half his face, pistol in his shaking hand. He didn't say a word, just raised the gun and fired. The bullet missed Bumpy by 3 inches, hit an innocent man 2 tables over, killed him instantly. Chaos erupted, people screaming, tables flipping, everyone diving for cover. Rollins fired again, missed again, the third shot went wide, shattered a window. Bumpy was already moving, knife in hand, crossing the room, but Rollins was done. He turned and ran, disappeared into the night before Bumpy could reach him. The restaurant was destroyed. 1 man dead, 3 wounded, police swarming the scene within minutes. But the message had been delivered. Bumpy Johnson had survived 3 assassination attempts by Dutch Schultz's best killer. Twice he'd put Rollins in the hospital. Once he'd done it while having dinner with a magazine editor and then ordered dessert. Word spread through New York's underworld before sunrise. Dutch Schultz's operation was finished in Harlem. The next morning, Dutch Schultz called an emergency meeting at his Bronx headquarters. Every captain, every enforcer still alive. Every man on his payroll who hadn't ended up in Mount Morris Park. Schultz sat at the head of the table, face red, hands shaking with rage. How many men do I need to send to kill 1 Negro? Silence. I sent 9 enforcers. They're dead. I sent collectors. They're dead. I sent Ulysses Rollins, the best killer in Chicago, and he comes back missing a fucking eyeball. Still silence. Nobody wanted to volunteer. One of his captains finally spoke. Boss, maybe we cut our losses. Harlem's not worth... Not worth it? Schultz slammed his fist on the table. I've lost 40 men in that neighborhood. 40? You want me to just walk away? The neighborhood's against us. The police won't help. And Bumpy Johnson is 1 man, Schultz interrupted. 1 short Negro with a knife, who's killed 40 of our people. The math was impossible. 9 black gangsters with no police protection, no political connections, no resources, fighting an army of white mobsters with everything. And the 9 were winning. Meanwhile, Dutch Schultz's other problems were piling up. The federal government was investigating his tax returns. Special Prosecutor Thomas Dewey was building a case against him. The commission was getting nervous about the attention Schultz was drawing. In October 1935, Lucky Luciano called a commission meeting. The topic, what to do about Dutch Schultz. Schultz had a proposal. We killed Dewey, 1 bullet, problem solved. The room went silent. Frank Costello spoke first. You don't kill prosecutors. You kill a prosecutor, the federal government comes down on all of us. Dewey's going to put me away for 30 years, Schultz said. I'm not waiting for that. The commission voted. 5 against, 1 for. Schultz stood up. Then I'll do it myself. He walked out of that meeting, a dead man. He just didn't know it yet. October 24th, 1935, 10:15 p.m., Palace Chop House, Newark, New Jersey. Dutch Schultz was eating dinner with 3 of his men, discussing the Dewey problem, planning the hit. 4 men walked through the door, long coats, hats pulled low, Tommy guns under the coats. The shooting lasted 11 seconds. When the smoke cleared, Dutch Schultz was on the floor, gut shot, his 3 bodyguards dead. Schultz survived long enough to make it to the operating table, died the next day, October 25th, 1935, at 8:35 p.m. The commission had spoken. Within hours, a telegram was delivered to Newark City Hospital, addressed to Dutch Schultz's deathbed. It read, As ye sow, so shall ye reap. Signed, Madame Queen of Policy. Stephanie St. Clair had won. Bumpy Johnson had won. Harlem had won. And the Italian mob learned something they should have known from the beginning. Some neighborhoods can't be conquered. 3 weeks after Dutch Schultz died, Bumpy Johnson got a message. Lucky Luciano wanted to meet. They met at the YMCA on 135th Street, sat on a bench outside. Luciano brought a chessboard. You play? Luciano asked. I do. They played in silence for 20 minutes. Luciano was good. Bumpy was better. Luciano finally spoke. Schultz was an idiot. Tried to take something that wasn't his. Got what he deserved. Agreed. But the numbers operation still needs structure. Can't have chaos. Bumpy moved his knight. What are you proposing? You run Harlem, independent operation. You pay us 10% of the gross. We stay out of your business. You stay out of ours. It was the first time in American history a black gangster negotiated as an equal with the Italian mob. Not as an employee, not as a subordinate, as a partner. Bumpy looked at the chessboard, looked at Luciano, 15%, 12%, deal. They shook hands, finished the game. Over the next 30 years, Bumpy Johnson and Lucky Luciano met every week to play chess. Former enemies, current allies, two men who understood that respect isn't given, it's taken. Bumpy took his with 36 stab wounds, with an eyeball hanging on a restaurant floor, with 40 bodies in Mount Morris Park, with a war that should have been impossible to win, but ended with him sitting across from the most powerful mobster in America, negotiating as equals. Harlem learned something that year. We protect our own. We don't bow. We don't surrender. And when someone comes to take what's ours, we remind them why that's a mistake. The Italian mob learned too. Some neighborhoods have invisible walls. Walls built with loyalty, with community, with men willing to die before they give up an inch. And history learned the most important lesson of all. The most dangerous man in the room isn't the one who yells, isn't the one who threatens, isn't the one with the biggest crew or the most guns. It's the man who straightens his tie, steps over your broken body, and calmly orders spaghetti and meatballs. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968. Not from a bullet, from a heart attack, at the same table in the Alhambra where he'd left Ulysses Rollins, bleeding 33 years earlier. But the message he sent that summer night in 1935, that message never died. Respect isn't given in Harlem. It's earned. It's taken. It's written in blood on sidewalks and carved into the memory of every person who thought they could walk into that neighborhood and walk out unchanged. Dutch Schultz sent 40 men to take Harlem. Only bodies came back.